actuellement pour assurer la sécurité des gens et des communautés. Je veux encore remercier tous ceux à travers le pays qui travaillent très fort pour protéger leurs voisins, nos citoyens d'un bout à l'autre de ce pays. Yesterday, I spoke with Captain Kevin Corkum and Connor Scott, two firefighters in Nova Scotia. They were involved in a particular act of heroism, putting their well-being at risk, racing into a burning community to evacuate an elderly man who was unaware of the threats they were facing. As always, speaking with firefighters, they tried to shrug it off a little bit as it's just our job. We're just there to help people with that extraordinary modesty of heroes. But I pushed on them a little bit. I said, you guys do these things day in and day out. Firefighters are stepping up, first responders are stepping up in harrowing situations to save their fellow citizens. And when we get an opportunity to see the direct impact, and it gets a little bit of coverage and the stories get out, it is all the more important that we be there to say thank you. I actually had a nice moment with Connor where he admitted that when he'd gotten home at the end of the day, he hadn't quite explained in detail the incident and the challenges they were facing. And his partner, who's pregnant with their child, just reading the news was a little bit worried for him. And I think a lot about partners and families of first responders. When I spoke with Kevin, I also spoke with his wife Amanda and Liam, and I want to thank right now all the families of firefighters, of first responders, of CAF members who put themselves in harm's way to protect, serve, and save Canadians from coast to coast to coast. Liam's in grade 4, and I actually asked him if he had any advice for my son, who's going into grade 4 next year, and he said it gets better. It's a little challenging, but not too bad. But having those moments to thank families and engage with the people in the front lines who are showing the very best of Canadians in stepping up is something I think we all need to be taking time to do, to recognize the first responders in our communities, those who are there to keep us all safe, even through the most difficult and devastating of times. In a moment, Minister Anand will speak to the current status of Canadian Armed Forces deployment in Alberta, Nova Scotia, and Quebec. There are hundreds of Armed Forces members now deployed. Additionally, the CAF is helping with everything from delivering food and supplies to people in Mingani, Quebec, to providing logistics support for water bombers at CFB Greenwood. Des centaines de membres des Forces armées canadiennes sont actuellement déployés. Ces déploiements s'ajoutent au soutien apporté aux pompiers et à l'équipement fourni, ainsi qu'au soutien apporté aux communautés autochtones. Matching funds are also live for Alberta, the Northwest Territories, and Nova Scotia, so if you can, please consider making a donation. Before I pass it over to Minister Blair, I want to recognize the air quality statements that have been issued by Environment Canada because of wildfire smoke. People across the country are being affected. We're seeing vulnerable people at risk, outdoor events cancelled, kids having to be kept inside at recess. I can't help but think, from my conversation with Liam yesterday to conversations with my own kids, the past few years have been challenging for kids. Whether it was through the pandemic, whether it was readjusting to school, whether it's now dealing with wildfires that have everyone really worried and smoke that's preventing them from going to play outside. I want to thank kids for continuing to play safe, to be safe, and to help around the house and to help their families get through these scary times, including all the kids who can't return to their homes all the way across the country. Please listen to your local health agencies about how to stay safe. On vit des moments difficiles, mais ensemble, comme toujours, on va passer à travers et s'en sortir. Je suis maintenant heureux de passer la parole au ministre Blair. Happy to turn it over to Bill now. Bill.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Good afternoon, everyone. Bon après-midi, tout le monde. As of today, there are 2,293 wildfires that have occurred in Canada. Approximately 3.8 million hectares have been burned. And across the country, as of today, there are 414 wildfires burning, 239 of which are determined to be out of control. Also, as of today, an estimated 20,183 people remain evacuated from their homes and communities. And while this is an overall reduction in parts of Alberta, Nova Scotia, and Quebec, where people have been able to return home, many are still displaced. And as fires continue to threaten their communities, we're working very closely with our provincial, territorial, and municipal partners and First Nations partners to ensure that we provide support to those who have been evacuated. We have also seen continued impacts to critical infrastructure in Quebec, such as roads and rural closures, telecommunication interruptions, and high-voltage power lines being threatened by the growing fires. I want to assure Canadians that all orders of government are working closely together, including with our Indigenous partners, to ensure a coordinated and effective response. It's all hands on deck, and it's around the clock. I also want to assure the Canadians that despite the challenging start to the wildfire season, there are strong plans in place. We work very closely with our provincial, territorial, and First Nation partners, and we have the capacity to respond. And just yesterday, I think all Canadians saw a heartwarming video of firefighters arriving from South Africa at the Edmonton International Airport. They've come to this country to assist, as coordinated by the Canadian Interagency Firefighter Centre, just as our Canadian firefighters have supported other countries with their response to their wildfires. And this is in addition to the firefighting support and resources that we've already received from the United States, Australia, and New Zealand, and which we also anticipate will be coming to Canada in the coming days. We understand 109 firefighters, for example, will be arriving from France tomorrow to assist in Quebec. To all the firefighters currently deployed across Canada, we say thank you for answering the call. In addition, NGOs, including the Canadian Red Cross and the United Way, have also stepped up across the country to provide support to evacuees and to those who have been impacted by the wildfires. I want to take the opportunity to sincerely thank all who have generously donated to our matching campaigns. And with federal and provincial contributions, these appeals have already raised over $26 million in Alberta, $6 million in Nova Scotia, and in the Northwest Territories, they are close to reaching their $300,000 goal. To the firefighters, first responders, search and rescue teams, and members of the Canadian Armed Forces who continue to move to danger to keep our communities safe, I want to say thank you for your incredible work. I also want to thank all the public servants, Indigenous leaders, emergency management personnel, community organization, and everyone who is working collaboratively together around the clock to coordinate resources and to keep Canadians safe. Thank you very much, and I will now turn the mic over to Minister Anand.
Good afternoon, bonjour. I want to extend, first and foremost, my deepest sympathies to everyone affected by the devastating wildfires across the country. Nous faisons tout en notre pouvoir pour apporter de l'aide à vos collectivités. Today, I'm going to provide an update on the support that the Canadian Armed Forces members are providing in 3 provinces, and I am thanking them for answering the call each and every time. I'll begin in Alberta, where approximately 130 Canadian Armed Forces members are currently deployed in Fox Creek and Fort Chipewyan. They're providing firefighting support, engineering support, and airlift capacity. On May 30th, they helped to evacuate more than 100 residents from Fort Chipewyan, which is only accessible by plane or boat during the summer. And on June 1st, 5 civilian fire trucks were transported to Fort Chipewyan by CC-130J Hercules aircraft to assist with wildfire response efforts. Now, in Nova Scotia, Canadian Armed Forces members are providing support in 3 areas: planning and coordination, that's logistics type work, ignition specialist personnel and equipment, and personnel and tools to assist with firefighting. Ignition specialist personnel from CFB Gagetown are now on the ground, tasked with helping to prevent fires from spreading. An immediate response unit of approximately 100 soldiers from 2nd Battalion, the Royal Canadian Regiment, has completed firefighting training and is ready to deploy as soon as tasks have been identified for them. 14-wing CFB Greenwood also provided a civilian company with accommodations, ramp space, fuel stock, and other logistics for their CL-415 water bombers and PC-12 observation aircraft. Au Québec, les membres des Forces armées canadiennes apporteront du soutien sous la forme suivante: du personnel et des ressources pour exécuter des tâches principales de lutte contre les incendies, un appui à la planification et à la coordination, du transport aérien aux fins de mobilité et de réalisation de tâches liées à la logistique. Environ 300 membres des Forces armées canadiennes participent à un déploiement à cette île. La réserve navale appuie également ces efforts. Le navire canadien de Sa Majesté Joliette sert de base d'opération avancée à cette île. De plus, une aéronef Hercules a contribué à l'acheminement de nourriture et de matériel aux résidents du territoire de la Mangani et la ville de Shefferville. CAF members, in conclusion, will continue to support provincial authorities as requested to keep communities and Canadians safe. And I thank them for their hard work, their dedication, and bravery, for stepping up day after day. Together, we are all hands on deck, and we will keep going on to meet this challenge. Thank you. Merci. Miigwech.
Hello, bonjour, everybody. First of all, I also echo the concern and the solidarity, actually, with Indigenous peoples across the country who are facing and are often on the first line of natural disasters like forest fires. Nous sommes très préoccupés par l'ampleur des incendies de forêt que nous observons. There are 17 First Nations that are currently affected by wildfire events, and there are 13 First Nations that are evacuated. More than 6,500 people remain evacuated. This is slightly lower than the numbers I reported yesterday, as some people are beginning to repatriate communities that are deemed safe and ready to return to. It is the safety of people that's the first priority and preoccupation of the chiefs that I've spoken with. Indeed, people are working incredibly hard to make sure that people are moved to safety, not just from the effects of the fire itself, but certainly the incredible health risk of being exposed to the degree of smoke that folks are facing in communities. Some communities are evacuating as a result of the incredible health risks to people that are already vulnerable and living with a number of health conditions. Chiefs like Chief Takaro of Mikisew First Nation spoke about critical infrastructure that they're losing, including hunting cabins on the land, critical to communities' livelihood and self-determination in terms of food security. Chief Martel of Katlodichi First Nation toured her devastated community with critical infrastructure, housing, administrative offices that have been lost, and had to break the news to the families that were evacuated that everything that they loved was gone overnight. And of course, we've seen chiefs and councils and Indigenous first responders rolling up their sleeves and working diligently to try to protect communities, and of course, with the first priority being to protect lives and make sure people are moved to safety. It is fortunate that the emergency management program run by the Indigenous Services Canada folks has been transformed to be proactive, to be supportive of community self-determination. And that has been reiterated time and again by chiefs and council, that the ability to have the flexibility to move quickly, to be able to take actions both on the evacuation side, but also on the protecting of critical infrastructure, has led to much more rapid decision-making and that sense of autonomy that actually allows communities to do their utmost best to protect the infrastructure, so there are homes to return to when the crisis passes. We know that First Nations continue to be on the front line of climate change. Communities are not only devastated from the effects of wildfires in their own communities, but also many are surrounded by forests that provide the economy that many members work in. And so we'll be with communities as they begin that hard work of assessing what it will take to rebuild in the cases of of communities that have damaged infrastructure. We'll be there to support communities as they help their members in extraordinarily difficult evacuee situations. And of course, we'll be there to help support with the rebuild efforts. This is an emergency and it is all hands on deck. And I'm very pleased to be able to support chiefs and communities with the tools they need for the self-determination that helps them move that quickly. Thank you.
First question goes to Mayor Robson from the Canadian Group.
Yeah, good afternoon. We've been told that your government is analyzing options for creating a national emergency response agency or organization. Can you explain what you're looking at, why you think it's needed, and when this decision might be made?
Well, the reality is, unfortunately, over the past years, we've seen extreme weather events increase in their intensity and their impact on Canadians, as well as on their cost to families, to provinces, and to the federal budget. We have, over the past years, seen atmospheric rivers in BC causing devastating floods. We've seen Hurricane Fiona hit harder than hurricanes in recent memory last year, and this year, the worst wildfire season we've ever had right across the country. So we need to continue to adjust and adapt to what we're doing. The Canadian Integrated Firefighting Agency was created back in 1982. It has seen many improvements and increases since, but we need to continue to make sure we are doing everything possible to both keep Canadians safe when these extreme weather events hit, but also make sure we're doing everything we can to predict, protect, and act ahead of more of these events coming. So we continue to discuss and look at new mechanisms and new ways of doing that, but I'll turn it over to Bill for more precise updates on where our thinking is.
Thank you, Prime Minister. The primary response to respond to these types of events, wildfires and flooding, rests with the provinces and territories across the country. And we work very closely in collaboration with them. Our Government Operations Centre is in daily and hourly contact with the provincial emergency operations centres across the country. And we have found on a number of instances, 3 times so far this year, where provinces have advised us that the situation that they're dealing with exceeds their capacity. And so in each case, we have responded for requests for assistance, and we've been able to provide a number of resources from different departments, including, and very importantly, the Canadian Armed Forces, and will continue to do so. But we also recognize that there's a need in all of the provinces and territories in every part of the country for additional firefighting resources. For example, it's one of the reasons Minister Wilkinson announced that NRCan is investing significantly in the training of 1,000 new firefighters in this country, and we're working with Indigenous partners and professional firefighter services in the IAFF in order to provide that training. We're also making significant investments in equipment, and we recognize as well the importance of a number of different assets, not just personnel and equipment, but also aerial equipment, and we work very closely internationally and across Canada to bring coordination to make sure that we have those resources where we need them and when we need them. And as the Prime Minister said, we're now dealing with a greater increase in frequency and severity of these events, and certainly the challenges of very widespread wildfire right across Canada has really called upon us to be very agile in the way in which we respond and deploy those assets. And for example, water bombers that were previously deployed in Nova Scotia, when they weren't able to be used in Nova Scotia because of weather and smoke conditions, have now been redeployed into Quebec. And we're still working with our international partners. We've got conversations going on with our American colleagues in particular, but also right across the country to make sure that we have those assets and resources when and where we need them. We'll also learn from these events. And if there is an opportunity to be more agile, more adept, more responsive to the needs of communities right across Canada, we're going to find ways to do it.
Follow-up.
Shifting gears a little bit, Meta has said that it's going to block news on Facebook and Instagram if C-18 passes. What's the point of the bill if the news is simply just blocked, and are you willing to sit down with them and try and find a compromise?
The various internet giants like Meta are posting every year record profits, while at the same time, local independent news is struggling across this country. We know Canadians rely on thoughtful, independent news sources to keep them apprised of what's going on in their communities and indeed around them in the world. The fact that these internet giants would rather cut off Canadians' access to local news than pay their fair share is a real problem. And now they're resorting to bullying tactics to try and get their way. It's not going to work. Canadians know how important news is, and access to quality local journalism particularly is essential for not just the well-being of their communities, for the well-being of our democracy. We will continue to make sure that these incredibly profitable corporations contribute to strengthening our democracy, not weakening it.
Next question.
Prime Minister Hajdu Charles of the Toronto Star. On David Johnston's testimony yesterday at the committee, it exposed what many non-political observers say are gaps in his work, such as not having spoken to MP Hendon or the main watchdog of Canada's elections. He said he only looked at a small portion of the ocean of documents. So notwithstanding the fact that he's got hearings to come, does any of what you heard on the substance yesterday give you pause or reason for concern that the job you wanted done isn't getting done and that public confidence is being further eroded? On the contrary,
Mr. Johnston is fulfilling the terms of the mandate and the questions posed to him. He and his team went through thousands upon thousands of documents, interviewed and questioned numerous people, from the top officials to politicians to people involved in this, to be able to put out a very thoughtful and responsible report. I can understand that certain members of the opposition and opposition leaders are choosing to criticize Mr. Johnston personally rather than actually criticize the report, and indeed are refusing to get read into the facts underlying those conclusions of the report, which are matters of national security, but offering, as CSIS has, briefings to the leaders so that they can take this issue of foreign interference as seriously as it deserves to be taken, seems an elementary step in tackling the issue of foreign interference from all perspectives. Unfortunately, the leader of the Conservative Party and the Bloc have refused to actually learn the facts and draw on the core intelligence upon which the conclusions in the former Governor General's report are being drawn, which leaves them free to make baseless personal attacks without being hindered by the actual facts of the matter. But that's not the kind of leadership, either responsible or serious leadership, that Canadians deserve on such an important issue.
Do you want to do that in French? For my colleagues.
I'm always happy to do it in French. Well, I will do it in French then. It's just not the way it's usually framed. I always want to answer it in French.
I'm going to say the question for the reporters is all.
Okay, bravo. Ce qui préoccupe les Canadiens, c'est que l'ingérence étrangère continue d'être une réalité. Ça fait plusieurs années qu'on a pris des mesures, qu'on les a mis en place pour protéger nos institutions, notre démocratie, nos citoyens, particulièrement des communautés de la diaspora, d'ingérence étrangère. Et on a demandé à l'ancien gouverneur général de regarder attentivement tout ce qui est en train d'être fait et tout ce qui a été fait pour contrer l'ingérence étrangère. Il a interviewé nombreux experts et gens dans la fonction publique et de politiciens. Il a regardé des milliers de pages de documents pour pouvoir mettre de l'avant son rapport. Or, ce rapport est ancré dans des informations, des renseignements confidentiels qui sont liés à la sécurité nationale, qui ne peuvent pas être partagés avec le public pour des raisons de sécurité, mais on encourage les chefs des partis d'opposition d'accepter des briefings de haut niveau pour pouvoir comprendre le fond des choses, pour pouvoir entendre directement les faits liées à l'ingérence étrangère pour mieux informer les débats importants et sérieux qui doivent être pris sur comment on va protéger notre démocratie. Or, le chef du Bloc, le chef du Parti conservateur, refuse carrément de s'informer sur ce qui se passe au niveau de l'ingérence. Il préfère faire des attaques personnelles contre l'ancien gouverneur général, des attaques partisanes contre tout le monde, plutôt que d'être responsable ou sérieux dans l'approche sur une question qui est très sérieuse pour tous les Canadiens.
On the transfer of convicted murderer and rapist Paul Bernardo to medium security, will you compel the Corrections Commissioner to publicly release the reasoning behind the initial decision and the rationale that any review uncovers? And if not, how do you explain to Canadians that his privacy trumps their right to an explanation?
Like so many Canadians, I was extremely shocked to see news of this transfer. That's why we've asked the Minister of Public Safety to follow up with Corrections Canada, to ask for more information and to look at what can be shared with Canadians, and the Minister is doing that work.
Prochaine question.
Émile Bergeron, La Presse canadienne. Je reviens au feu de forêt. On sait que notre flotte d'avions citernes au Canada, malheureusement, est insuffisante et désuète avec l'année exceptionnelle qu'on a et ce que les experts prévoient pour la suite des choses. Maintenant qu'on le sait, là, il y a le programme aussi d'avions citernes plus modernes là, que Bombardier a vendu à Viking Air. Par contre, ces avions plus modernes-là, les premiers modèles, ils vont être prévus, la construction des premiers modèles, si les provinces canadiennes en demandent, elles ne pourront pas, la construction ne pourra pas débuter avant 2030 parce que les premiers modèles sont destinés par exemple à d'autres pays comme la France. Donc, est-ce que vous trouvez ça acceptable dans le contexte actuel que la construction pour des avions citernes au Canada commencerait aussi tard et qu'est-ce que votre gouvernement peut faire, va faire pour accélérer ça?
Tout d'abord, dans la situation immédiate, on est en train de tout faire pour s'assurer qu'on ait les ressources, que ce soit les pompiers, que ce soit le matériel, que ce soit le transport nécessaire ou les avions citernes nécessaires pour répondre aux urgences à travers le pays. On voit qu'on est dans une année pire que ce qu'on a déjà eu et nos ressources sont étirées, mais on continue d'être là dans la mesure du possible. Mais c'est certain que pour les années à venir, il va falloir qu'on réfléchisse à comment s'équiper pour cette nouvelle réalité. On va faire face à de plus en plus d'événements météorologiques extrêmes qui vont être de plus en plus chers en coût pour les familles, pour les communautés et aussi pour notre pays. Comment est-ce qu'on va se doter des capacités de répondre à ces urgences, mais aussi en même temps, comment est-ce qu'on va s'assurer de minimiser l'impact pour les décennies à venir de ces événements? Et ça, c'est en continuant notre lutte contre les changements climatiques. Continuer de baisser nos émissions, continuer de transformer notre économie de façon à créer des bons emplois et protéger les générations futures. C'est toutes des conversations que nous sommes en train d'avoir et nous allons faire des suivis sur les besoins projetés pour les années à venir d'équipements comme les avions citernes.
Suivi.
Le gouvernement du Québec dit maintenant que du côté de la SOPFEU, la tendance là, pour que cette année-ci soit la pire depuis 1991, on l'a déjà dépassée. Au niveau du Canada, les chances que ça arrive à l'échelle du Canada s'agrandissent de jour en jour, d'heure en heure. Alors, êtes-vous aussi confiant que lundi, au niveau des capacités des Forces armées canadiennes, quelles sont les dernières informations que vous avez eues et comment ça avance pour le plan de contingence?
Comme j'ai dit, nous avons, selon nos projections, assez de ressources pour pouvoir contrer ces feux de forêt, même avec les prévisions pour le reste de l'été. Mais ça me permet aussi de prendre un moment pour remercier les centaines de pompiers venant des États-Unis qui sont là en train de travailler, nos collègues, nos amis d'Australie, de Nouvelle-Zélande, de la France, les Sud-Africains qui viennent d'arriver et d'autres pays qui sont là pour aider en même temps. Nous savons que c'est une réalité de plus en plus à travers la planète. Quand il y a eu des feux en Australie ou il y a eu des feux ailleurs, les Canadiens envoient leurs ressources. C'est une chose sur laquelle ça fait du bien d'avoir des amis, des alliés qui sont en train de travailler avec nous, comme nous, on va travailler avec eux pendant des moments difficiles pour eux, moins difficiles pour nous. Mais on va continuer de regarder pour s'assurer qu'on sera là tout pendant l'été pour répondre aux besoins à travers le pays.
Merci, c'est tout le temps que le gouvernement pour les questions aujourd'hui. Le ministre va rester pour un autre 10 minutes.
Merci tout le monde.
Québec parle actuellement du fait qu'on va manquer de pilotes pour les avions citernes. Est-ce qu'il y a au sein des forces armées des pilotes qui peuvent venir en aide ou alors il faut vraiment qu'ils se retournent vers des compagnies privées? Savez-vous ça?
Je voudrais commencer par dire que c'est un temps de reconstitution en général dans les forces armées canadiennes. Donc, ce n'est pas seulement les pilotes, mais tout le monde dans les forces armées canadiennes c'est que nous devons avoir plus en plus de gens dans nos forces. Au sujet d'entraînement de pilotes, nous savons que nous avons une capacité ici au Canada. Nous continuons d'examiner ces possibilités pour aider avec nos forces et avec les feux de forêt, avec autre chose internationale.
Pour ce qui est des avions citernes pour les feux de forêt, est-ce qu'il y a des pilotes militaires qui pourraient être appelés en renfort?
Nous continuons de travailler avec l'équipe de Bill Blair et tout le monde ici, partout dans notre gouvernement, d'aider où quand nous pouvons le faire, mais c'est un processus. Mais je suis ici pour offrir tous nos ressources si nous avons la capacité d'offrir ces ressources, bien sûr.
Hi, my question would be for you, Minister Blair. Just wanted to know, have we reached the point where we have the worst year now? In terms of wildfire?
I think certainly we're off to a very, very difficult start, and the amount of hectares that have been burnt in this country exceed recent memory in our records. And so, yes, in that context, I think it has been the worst year, although we've been very fortunate so far this year. There's been no loss of life. There has been what we call wildfire interface, where it's impacted on communities and people have had to be evacuated. But by a number of different measures, certainly this has been one of our most challenging years on record. And what we are seeing, particularly today, with the wildfires that are taking place in Quebec, the smoke impact, the impact on the air quality, not just in Canada, but right across the eastern portion of North America is very significant. I think by all measures, this is perhaps the worst year that we have experienced with wildfires as long as we've been keeping records.
The Prime Minister just said that although there's enough resources to intervene, they are stretched at this point. Do you think that we will see scenarios like it almost happened in Quebec, where we will have to let burn some communities because we will not be able to protect them?
Well, first of all, I think wildfire is a naturally occurring event, and the greatest challenge, I think, for our provincial territorial partners and for all of us working together is to deal with all of the fires in totality, but of course the priority always has to be given to those fires which are impacting and interfacing with populated areas where there is critical infrastructure such as power lines and other critical infrastructure. And so our first responsibility is, of course, to protect life, but also to protect that critical infrastructure. But there's a significant number, over 160 fires currently burning in Quebec, and certainly we're working very closely, and I want to be very clear, I'm in regular contact with François Bonnadel, my ministerial counterpart in the Quebec government. There's a very strong collaboration between SAPTU and our Government Operations Centre, and a close collaboration. We have been able to respond to their requests of assistance, to provide the assistance they require, but it's ongoing work. And so we're continuing to explore ways in which we can obtain additional aircraft, for example. As Quebec identifies the need, we'll be there to support them in everything they're doing. I think there's a very strong collaboration. I would not suggest to Canadians that the current situation has exceeded our capacity, but it's certainly challenging. And it does require that we find additional resources. And over 1,000, for example, firefighters have already been coordinated and brought into Canada through the work of CIFC, the Canadian Interagency Firefighter Centre. And there are also arrangements between the provinces and some other international jurisdictions as well. And so we'll continue in that work. We'll make sure that our provincial and territorial partners and First Nations have the resources and support that they need to get through this. And I would also highlight that there is also the disaster financial assistance arrangement. We know putting out the fires is the first priority in protecting people's lives, but there is also going to be followed by a period of recovery where we're going to have to go into those communities that have been impacted and make sure that we are there to support them in that recovery and the rebuilding communities that have been damaged or lost. And so that work will also go on as we go forward, working together. It's a significant issue in Nova Scotia. It will be in Quebec and in Alberta. We'll be there to work with people, and we'll make sure that they get the resources. And we are quite prepared, by the way, always to reach out to our international partners because they reach out to us. And so during their fire seasons, we send Canadian firefighters to help them, and they reciprocate by sending their firefighters to us during our fire season. It's a very close collaboration, and we're very grateful for the support that we receive. By all means.
I might just add also from a federal government perspective that the mention that Minister Blair made of the Government Operations Centre is absolutely crucial. The request for assistance from the province would come into the Government Operations Centre, and at that point, Minister Blair is on the phone with the federal counterparts, including me. So when I was in Singapore, for example, receiving a call in the middle of the night from Minister Blair, texting with him, communicating with the Government Operations Centre and the Canadian Armed Forces is really our top priority, and we do it on an expedited basis. We waste no time. And I will say that we have responded to every single request that has come forward from 3 provinces, Alberta, Nova Scotia, and of course, Quebec. And we'll continue to do that. We realize the urgency of the situation. We're all feeling it every day in this city and across the country, and we'll continue to act on an expedited basis for the benefit of Canadians.
Next question.
Yeah, Mr. Blair, I know you've studied national flood insurance program and the parameters of that. We've seen in U.S. states private insurance companies walk away from insuring homes for fires there because of the risk there. Are you concerned about that potentially spreading to Canada?
Well, certainly we watch with concern because I think you're referencing in California, a number of insurance companies, some of the larger ones have announced that they're not going to be providing that availability in that jurisdiction. We've talked very closely, we work very closely with the Insurance Bureau of Canada, with the Brokers Association, and with our large insurance companies. We have been assured that no one is contemplating that at this time. The vast majority of homes that have been destroyed in the fires, and there are several hundred that have actually been impacted by that, they will have home insurance policies which will include fire protection. And so for those who have lost their homes, that is available to them, and I would urge them to work very closely with their insurance companies. We will as well. And where damage is uninsurable or to critical infrastructure in the communities, the federal government will also be there to backstop the need for that, investing in that rebuild. But right now, I want to assure Canadians that we've received assurances from the Canadian insurance industry that at this time there is no contemplation of withdrawing the availability of fire insurance for residents and homes across Canada.
And Minister Anand, last year, I believe it was, General Eyre raised concerns about the Canadian military being stretched on disaster response when it is having recruitment challenges and when, of course, we also have wars in Europe and other calamities around the world. Are you concerned this fire season that you were starting to hit that point where the Canadian forces are being stretched?
Well, I want to start by saying that across the country, we have what are known as IRUs, Incident Response Units, and they are standing ready at all times to respond to any type of disaster, natural disaster. So in Hurricane Fiona, in the floods in British Columbia, in the forest fires across this country, it's the incident response units that are, immediate response units, that are activated. and they're always ready to help. And it is our top priority to be responding to issues that threaten the safety and health of Canadians. So those immediate response units are always in place, and they're always staffed up, and they're always ready to assist. And so that's what I want to stress first and foremost. On the broader question of capacity and growth in the Canadian Armed Forces, yes, we will continue to make sure we're focused on that. In fact, that has to be our top priority, especially when we are faced with natural disasters, environmental and climate change related issues, as well as international deployments, whether in Latvia or anywhere else. We need to grow the Canadian Armed Forces. That's why we have a reconstitution plan. That's why we have a recruitment strategy. That's why we have a retention strategy. And that's why we will continue to focus on building a Canadian Armed Forces where everyone feels protected, respected, and empowered to serve every single day when they put on a uniform for this country.
Thank you, everyone. That's all the time we have for questions today.